Hello, class. Welcome to Bio 143. This is the lecture for week one, and we will be talking about life on Earth, and this will be an introductory chapter, just talking about how we study life and the different classifications of organisms, as well as the scientific method and the elements of the scientific method. This chapter will be divided into two videos, and each video will be about 30 slides because this lecture is about 68 slides. So I will divide your lecture into two videos, and please let me know if you have any questions uh, about this lecture, about anything that you might have not been able to understand, and I'll be more than happy to help you understand it. So in this lecture, in chapter one, the outline for the chapter would be to ask ourselves, what is life and what is biology, what is evolution, and how did scientists study evolution, and how do scientists study life, and the different levels that they can look closely at life and what is science at the end. And specifically, we will be talking about the scientific method and the different elements of the scientific method. So to start with biology, the word itself comes from the Greek words. The first part is bio, which means life, and logi, which means the study of. So biology is the study of life. It's the study of organisms that share common characteristics as well as different characteristics. So organisms, they define life. They need energy and they need materials in order to survive, right? We need to eat food, and we need to also get energy from the sun, and we need to get energy from the food that we consume in order to be able to live and reproduce and grow. We also always maintain an organized complexity within our bodies. God has created us in such a way that our body is always working to maintain a state of homeostasis. And what is that state? What is that state? What does it mean? It's a state where we're healthy, our body is functioning normally, all of the biochemical reactions and mechanisms happening in our body have to be maintained at a certain level for us to be healthy. So our body has its own mechanisms of adjusting different reactions, of allowing certain reactions to occur in order to maintain that healthy state called homeostasis. So we have been so intelligently designed by our Creator in such a way that we're always maintaining organized complexity. And this does not only apply to the human being, it also applies to other organisms. We are capable of perceiving stimuli, everything that's happening outside, surrounding us. We're capable of sensing that information, perceiving that information, and responding to that specific stimuli. And this is the nervous system in our body is what allows us to do so. We are also continuously growing. Our babies start to grow, and you start to notice that they're growing so fast. Early on, about a year or 2 years, you see that they're growing so fast, and they're going to continue to grow. And we are continuously growing as organisms. We're continuously reproducing in our bodies as part of the growth process. Our cells are dividing continuously. We are shedding off dead cells, and we are continuously producing new cells, and that's part of growth. We are continuously reproducing offsprings, producing babies, and new generations as we grow older. We also have the capacity to evolve according to the evolution theory. Now, to talk about life, we also always have to start with the simplest unit of life. The simplest unit of life is called the cell, and that is the smallest unit of life. The cell has its own machinery that allow it to do what it needs to do. In the human body itself, we have different cells. We have optical cells, for example. We have muscle cells. We have skin cells. Each cell serves a different role in the body. And for that specific reason, the machinery that lives and that resides inside that enclosed cell has its own role or has its own function, has a specific job that allows the cell to do what it needs to do. So the cell is a unit which functions all together as one team because the organelles that live within the cells are all cooperating together as a team to make sure that this cell delivers its job properly in the body. And as I mentioned, the cell is enclosed by a membrane, and this membrane is called the cell membrane. It allows the cells to be kind of a closed system, but it's not completely closed because it is still communicating with other cells in our body. This is a picture of what the cell looks like. So the cell, as I said, it's a closed structure. It's enclosed within a cell wall, within a cell membrane. And this is an example right here. As you can see, there is a nucleus which serves a specific function. There's also other organelles, and there could be the mitochondria, the the cytoplasm is considered an organelle, and it contains so many different biomolecules that all work together, all undergo certain reactions to make sure that the cell uh, does its function. So as we previously mentioned, all organisms acquire and use materials as well as energy. So some examples of material and energy, of materials that the organisms need are water, minerals, as well as other simple chemical building blocks like proteins. Proteins give us amino acids that are important for different proteins used within our body. We also do need energy as well. And we need those two things in order to sustain our life, in order to maintain our organization, to grow, as well as to reproduce. This is an example of some properties of life where you can see that the antenna as well as the eyes of this organism, these are the living things that respond to stimuli, just like our eyes. We use our eyes to see, we use our sense of touch to feel. The gut is where for example, in this organism, where there is the living things are acquiring nutrients and decomposing nutrients, digesting nutrients, and producing sources of energy, as well as vitamins and nutrients that are necessary for our body. The eggs in this living organisms are an example of reproduction that every organism participates in. So we need materials, and we gave example of what materials can be, and now for and so also organisms obtain energy in two ways. So they need materials, and they also obtain energy in two ways. They can obtain that energy directly from the sun or indirectly from the sun. So photosynthesis is an example of a process where plant cells and some single-celled organisms, they capture sunlight and they use that sunlight as energy. Whereas other organisms, they consume energy-rich molecules, like for example, the food that we eat contains energy. Uh, it comes from the sugar, it comes from glucose. Our body breaks it down and it generates energy molecules that can be used that can be used by our body's machinery to keep us healthy. So energy can be obtained and acquired in two different ways. And this is an example of the flow of energy as well as the recycling of nutrients in nature. Organisms also, as we mentioned, they actively maintain an organized complexity, and so um, the way that our designer, our creator, has designed this system for every organism is so unique. And for specifically for the human body, it's in such a way that the body, as I said, is continuously working, even when we're sleeping, at every second, all the time. It's working to make sure that there's an equilibrium, or there should be a balance in our body that shouldn't be disturbed, right? And so our body works continuously to shift things around to make sure that that equilibrium is always, or that balance is always maintained. So cells in our body, they pump chemicals in and out for appropriate chemical reactions to occur. They also do maintain relatively constant internal conditions, or the state of homeostasis. And so this is an example of how our organisms maintain relatively constant internal conditions. Is our brain, for example, tells us that we need to drink more water if we're dehydrated. and in order for us not to get dehydrated, we drink more water, and that's an order from our brain. Or for example, if we get too hot, our body will start to sweat, and that's a cooling mechanism that has been designed by our Lord to make sure that we our body is capable of maintaining itself through these complex mechanisms. And we also said that all organisms, perceive and respond to stimuli. So the organisms are capable of understanding what's going around them, sensing what's happening around them, and they do that through the help of sensory organs, which are present in animals, and they can also, and that would allow them to detect different changes in the surrounding or whatever is happening in their surrounding, such as light, such as sound, such as chemicals, tasting, or touching. So all of these are due to sensory organs that are present in the organism. Now, the internal stimuli, for example, in our body, there are also internal stimuli. There are also triggers that happen inside our body that our body has to respond to internally without us knowing about it, without us being consciously aware that it's happening. And there you go. Again, another point of complexity in our body, another idea that should strengthen our um, our fascination with the intelligent design that our Creator has done in a human being and in a human body and in animals, right? So sometimes in our body, there are some stretch stimuli. The muscle will stretch, and that would automatically trigger something else to happen. A temperature. So, for example, if my temperature is elevated, I don't tell my body to sweat. My body does it on its own. And so there's a subconscious sensory and motor mechanism happening inside my body without me being aware of it. And that is, again, to make sure that my homeostasis is maintained, my healthy body is kept healthy. And my body also responds to internal stimuli such as pain as well as chemical receptors. Plants and bacteria do respond to stimuli as well. So, for example, plants do grow towards light, as you can see. Bacteria do move towards nutrients in a medium. And again, we also said that our fourth point, I believe, was that organisms grow. And so every organism becomes larger and larger over time, right? We grow from being a baby and then an infant and then a kid and then a grown up. So we are continuously growing. Our bodies are continuously producing more and more and more cells in order to increase the mass of the body. Plants, birds, and mammals all do the same. Bacteria do grow as well by enlarging their cells. They divide in half to reproduce after the genetic material has been copied. And so bacteria do grow by enlarging their cells. For us, we produce more cells in order to increase our mass. And and for that growth process to happen, of course, we need to eat properly and acquire energy. And these are key ingredients for the growth process because without these acquired materials, they will the growth will not occur as these acquired materials have to be converted to energy that would allow the growth process to occur. We also reproduce. Organisms also reproduce, and they do that, in fact, by making sure that they uh, um, give away their genetic material correctly. So they produce by dividing the cell in half, and these are the reproduction cells in specific, which we will talk about. They will divide that cell in half, producing seeds or producing or laying eggs or bearing live young. So they do that by dividing the genetic material. They give rise to offsprings that have the same type of genetic information as their parents, right, as their parents' genetic material. And this genetic material is basically our DNA. DNA carries the genetic material. It carries our genetic code that we inherit from our parents and which our parents inherited from their parents again. And during that process, there's a lot of random selection, which means that we're not going to be exactly the same as our mom or dad. We are going to be totally different because that combination of the two has led to a totally unique organism with its own genetic information that makes me distinguishable from someone else, makes me unique in my genetic information than someone else. And this creates continuity of life, this passing of genetic material, and also the variety in the genetic material. And these are some pictures of examples of reproduction in different organisms. This is a picture of the DNA, which we will study later on. The DNA is a double helix. As you can see, it is in such a way that in our body, it always maintains this double helix form and this organized, very organized structure that is very small, and it has not been able to be seen until not too long ago using special microscopes that allow us to actually observe the DNA in real life at real time and look at its structure. The DNA is very small. It is at the nanoscale. It is something we cannot view using a light microscope. It requires special electron microscopes, and with the advance of science, we have been able to do so and study it and look at it in real time. And so we also said that organisms collectively have the capacity to evolve, and this is when scientists came up with the theory of evolution. And basically, the theory of evolution states that modern organisms are descendants from pre-existing forms of life that have been selected, naturally selected, using a natural selection process due to their ability to adapt to the certain environment that they were in. So, for example, at different times there were different organisms and that have different characteristics. Now, the reason why they have different characteristics is because they have to have those characteristics to adapt to the certain environment that they're in. So there are certain changes that occur according to this theory through time in DNA within the population of organisms, and this results in evolution. So, as populations are, by definition, are groups of the same type of organisms that live in the same area, which has the same environment. So evolution explains, according to the evolution of the theory by scientists, that it explains the diversity on life and on Earth, of life on Earth, and that is because it provides an explanation for the similarities that is found among different types of organisms that live within a certain area. So, for example, chimpanzees and people have various physical features in common, and they have been able to find that after they decoded the human DNA as well as the chimpanzee's DNA, that there's a little bit of difference between the two, less than 5%. And so then, in order for them to understand why this is happening, they said that there are three natural processes that underlie evolution. The first one is genetic variation among the members of the population, and that is basically, we've talked about that, how there's always genetic variation in the DNA because there's random combinations that might happen, and this is the first natural process. The second one is the inheritance of those variations by the offsprings of the parents carrying the variation. So the parents pass that variation to their offsprings. And then natural selection is the last, where there is a natural selection of only those who survive the environmental conditions they are in. And then those who cannot, they become extinct. So what are the original sources of differences in DNA? And this is what we previously again talked about in the last two slides, is that there's increasing variety. Why am I so different from my mother and from my father? Because there is a lot of differences happening when my mother's and my father's reproductive cells are combining to form a little fetus that grew up to be me. Why am I different than them? And this is because there are different random variations in DNA, and also there are mutations. So the variations, they are due to genes. The genes are the different sections in the DNA that carry certain genetic information, and they are components of DNA, and they are the basic units of heredity. So they carry specific properties or describe specific properties that we have. For example, there is a specific gene that decodes or that codes for the color of my eyes. Again, there is a certain gene that decodes for the color of my hair. So genes carry that information, that genetic information that is unique to me. These mutations occur when in the process of reproduction, and they also um, occur when certain changes in the genes are mistakenly copied. So when that happens, when they are mistakenly copied, there is a mutation, there is a change to the DNA, there is a change to the code, the genetic code of the organism. And this could also it could also result. So it's not only just a natural process, but it could also result from certain damage. So we all hear that we're not supposed to be outside in the sun when it's really hot without sunscreen, and we're not supposed to be exposed to UV rays, for example, for a long time. And this is because exposure to such things, such as UV rays or toxic chemicals or cigarette smoke, all of that are capable of mutating our DNA. And this is why they tell a mother who is pregnant, a mother who's to be mother who is pregnant, not to be surrounded by cigarette smoke, because that is capable of causing, it has the potential to cause certain mutations in the DNA, and the baby is at high risk when its brain is still developing. So some of these mutations are inherited, and they might occur in the sperm or the egg cells, and or they might again be caused again by damage from these possible um, sources. And the effect of the mutation can be that it has no effect. It can be that it could decrease a certain ability or function if it happened in a certain gene. For example, if it happened in a gene that encodes for my liver cell, for example, for a biochemical that's important for the liver, then it will be a decreased ability or function in the liver if there's a mutation. Or it could lead to the death of the organism, or it could lead to an increase in an organism's ability to survive as well as reproduce. And this is the rare effect of mutation. But when these mutations help the individuals survive and reproduce, this is when we. This is what evolution. This is what scientists who believe in the theory of evolution have stated, that the natural selection process at which organisms with certain inherited traits, they only or inherited mutations, they survive and produce better than other ones. So as time passes by, there's going to be an overly production of organisms that are able to survive a particular environment, and those who are not, they will become extinct. So organisms that best meet these environmental challenges leave the most offspring. They will reproduce and pass on their inherited mutations, and natural selection preserves these genes that help the organism's process. Now, in the process when they have inherited those certain genes and they're able to flourish and survive, they are adapting. And adaptations are basically structures or physical processes that occur in the organism's behavior or in the organism's biology, in the organism's biochemical processes that help it to survive and reproduce. And adaptations are only specific to a certain environment. So the organism will develop specific adaptation structures that would help it to survive in this environment way better and a lot more than in another environment. So it all depends on the conditions of the environment. Species that cannot adapt to this environmental changes, they become extinct by the natural selection process, and they are basically they become extinct, as for example the dinosaurs. They are completely removed from that population. So the many different habitats or environments in an area, coupled with the evolutionary adaptive processes, are what, according to what scientists said, based on the theory of evolution, are the reason why there's variety or biodiversity. And humans are responsible for accelerating the rate of environmental changes. Humans are responsible for changing the environmental conditions as time passes. And therefore, that would lead to the extinction of more species because those species will not be able to survive and flourish in the conditions that the human being is actually creating. And so there have been some scientists who have talked about evolution, and most of which was Darwin, who formulated the basis of the modern understanding of evolution when they devised this theory in the mid 1800s. And this picture here is a very interesting picture because it allows us to look at the levels of biological organization, and we are going to study these levels. The smallest level is the actual atom, and I'm not sure if some of you have heard of what the atom is, but for those of you who haven't, an atom is the smallest particle of an element that retains the properties of an element. It is like the smallest unit of an element, and different elements are that we have that are important for us: oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen. All of these are different elements, and the smallest unit particle of that element is the atom. Okay, then comes the molecule, which is a combination of atom. Then comes the cell. Then comes the tissue, the organ system, the multicellular organ system, population, species, community, ecosystem, and then biosphere. So I will stop here for this lecture, and then I will continue with how do scientists study life in the next lecture. Thank you for listening.